Hi Violet,
Yeah,
welcome to the National Critics' Choice online news, along with the policymaker column. Um, Here in Singapore, you have been regarded as one of Singapore's, food ambassador and world renowned, for many of the well-known Singapore cuisines, such as the Nonyang cuisine. Um, Tell us more about what's happening right now with the Nonyang cuisine in food scene. Is it going to still carry on and exist for the next 2 or 3 generations?
I think so. It's had a revival, which I think when I first wrote about it, maybe in the 70s, it was the whole culture was uh, sort of slowing down. And I think now with like people with my children's generation, they grew up with Western food, but they love Nyonya food as well. And there's a whole lot of I think the most important is whether the next generation loves it, because it's no use if it's older people liking it all the time. It's got lovely flavors, exotic. It's a marriage of Chinese and Malay food, so it means you get the repository of two great cultures. Chinese food, I think Chinese cuisine is one of the best cuisines in the world, if not the best. And the Malay food is actually the cooking of the Spice Islands. Singapore is surrounded by Malaysia, Indonesia, and then further afield Thailand. And the food that's sort of the Spice Islands is distinguished by fresh root spices, which is different from Indian, which is dried seed spices. So both are spicy but different. And the Spice Islands is like galangal, different gingers. It's like yellow ginger, which is turmeric, blue ginger, galangal. And in Indonesia, there's gingers like kencur. And then, shallots, garlic. And actually, if you think of it, it's very good for your health. You're eating all the roughage, which is in the spice mix. So the food is thickened not by flour, but by actual vegetables, which have been ground to a paste. And it's sauteed, and sometimes it doesn't have to be. Then the flavor comes from coconut milk, or tamarind, or lime. And then sugar, it could be palm sugar, or white sugar. And then there are the famous Spice Island spices of cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, and all these make a lovely combination. It can be quite rich. So when you sort of marry it with Chinese food, it's lovely, because in a proper Nyonya meal, you must have half of it Chinese and half of it Malay, part of our culture.
So now a lot of people said that the Nonyang culture is disappearing in Singapore, and perhaps even in Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
But yet there are communities, who claim that that's not so. But could you explain to us a little bit more about the history of how the Nonyang culture really came about? Because it remains as a mystery to most people, even around the world.
There are several. Okay, first of all, it's known as Peranakan. It's a Malay word, and the Peranakan means to be born here. It means more than being born here. It means it was the Chinese diaspora that came from China a few centuries ago. They came even earlier, but the Nyonya culture grew in Malacca. It is a distinctive subculture, which is a marriage of Malay and Chinese. It was the traders that came, and then the men would marry Malay ladies in those days, and the girls of the marriages would only marry the men of the culture. Eventually the men could only marry women of the culture, and the women would marry new Chinese immigrants to take in new blood, for example. The joke was the fathers would wait at the port in Malacca and look at the boat coming in, and whoever looked like a competition for the family business would be married to the daughter. Yeah, and it became a very matriarchal society, because a lot of the men didn't have families here then. They married into their wives' families. And you have these huge mansions in Malacca, which are Chinese as well as British, as well as there's a bit of Malay. The Chinese part is you enter the front door into the main hall, which is like the moat, which unless you're a personal friend, you never go beyond the main hall. And then you go to the first courtyard, and then the next hall, and the second courtyard, the next hall. And actually it's like apartments, it's an apartment block. Many families live together, and then one family would be in one room. And those were courtyard houses in Malacca. And then the culture went to Penang, and then Singapore. And sociologists say that actually the culture arose from British colonization, and it didn't arise from British colonization. It was like it flowered under British colonization, and that's why the three centers are Malacca, Singapore, and Penang, which was the straits, British Strait settlements. And because they were the first people to speak English, they were the first people to be able to communicate with the British, and so they were the bridge between the new Chinese who came and the British. And being friends with the masters, you were like the sophisticated people in those days. Then it went into a decline because after a few generations, it's like the Chinese believe the first generation makes the money, the second generation maybe consolidates it, the third generation spends it. But it has been very vibrant and alive. And actually, there's Peranakan societies in Phuket, Indonesia, Medan, Surabaya, Semarang, and it's actually enjoyed a revival because there's a Peranakan Association in Singapore. So the word Peranakan means to be born here. It also meant that it was a very conscious decision to give up allegiance to the Chinese emperor for the British Empress, Queen Victoria. And so home for the Peranakans was always this part of the world. It wasn't back in China. It's different from a lot of Chinese where mentally home is China. And it's known as Peranakan. It's also known as Baba culture. And Baba is actually the Malay word for the men of the culture. And Nyonya is a Malay word for the women. It means a lady. I mean, the Mrs. So and so. But it's known as to a lot of us who are Peranakans, we call it Baba culture. But I think the word Nyonya has become sort of more worldwide and popular. We're also known as Straits Chinese. So there's so many versions of the same culture. It gets a bit confusing sometimes to some people.
So are there such groups known as the Indian Peranakas as well?
Okay, there are Indian Peranakans which are known as Chetty Malacca. And then the Malacca, and the Chetty is with the Chettias who are the money lenders. And there is an enclave in Malacca itself where the ladies wear sarong kebayas and they have the Indian Malacca food. And one friend has written a cookbook on the Chetty Malacca food, which is interesting. It's got Indian with Malay and Chinese blend. Again, it's Indians who have made their homes in this part of the world. And really, this is home, that maybe a few centuries old as well. And Malacca seems to be the heartland of this sort of Malay peninsula, because it was the first to be colonized by the Portuguese and the Dutch, and then the British, and then with the British went to Penang and then Singapore.
The cuisine itself, the Peranakan cuisine, or Noyan cuisine, would you agree that the cuisine has a lot of influence and a mix between the British menu as well as the Southeast Asian menu?
Yeah, I think when people talk about the marriage of the cultures between Malay and Chinese, and the Chinese part is Hokkien province, they forget the very strong British influence, because that was really part of our culture. So a Peranakan breakfast is like a British breakfast, bacon and eggs. And a lot of British food is incorporated into our cuisine, like pies and stews, for example, and the cakes, for example, butter cakes, sponge cakes, very old-fashioned cakes like cream puffs and all that.
What do you see ahead for where the Peranakan culture is going to? Is it going to continue to evolve to be even more modernized, or were traditions able to stay relevant?
It doesn't seem to be a culture that translates well into modernization. When you're Peranakan, there's a part that is Peranakan, which is your clothes, your language, your customs, and seems to be locked in time. And yet you're modern at the same time. So whatever part of you is Peranakan is very traditional. It's like the Chinese traditions that we have are dead in China, because China evolves with each generation. I mean, that's a normal culture, but it's like any immigrant group. Whatever you took from back home, it means so sentimental, and we're having customs that are out of date. So that makes it interesting, because if you want to study Chinese culture of maybe a few hundred years ago, you should study the Peranakans. Some of them, I mean, if you look at the wedding, you look at some other, traditions like bowing to your family when for Chinese New Year. And I know of even a Peranakan friend who had maybe 30 to 40 years ago a funeral that lasted 21 days. And for the 21 miles, he was a very influential. Can I stop 1 second? Cannot